Do we know when we're live, by the way?
We are live.
We are live. Okay. Hello, everyone. Glad I just said that.
So anybody who is joining us, feel free to say hi in the chat so we feel a little bit more live and less alone.
Yeah. That could have been an embarrassing start.
Do we know when we're live so that I don't say? Hi, Sophie. It's also very reassuring for everyone to say hello so that we know that everything's working and you're managing to join us.
It's also cool to know like your positions, like whereabouts you're from, whereabouts you're listening from as well. Yeah, we'd love to hopefully be able to involve you guys as much as possible. Thanks, Chica, kicking us off.
Just gonna wait for a few moments before we get started, just giving people a chance to sign in.
Hey, Josh. Oh, nice. Hi, Joe Bunny. Very cool.
And while you're waiting, if you do want to scan the QR code on the screen, so you can follow Codapad's LinkedIn and keep up with all sorts of updates, including webinars like this one. Okay. Okay, hello everybody. Hello everybody to everybody who's joining us, wherever you are. Let's get started. So hello to everyone in the audience and hello again to Lauren, Emily and Mike. I am your host today. My name is Natalie and I'm part of the marketing team here at Codapad. Thank you again for taking the time to join us today as we talk about hiring, skills and candidate experience. So before we dive in, I wanted to quickly share some practical information. I wanted to introduce my colleague, Ken, who will be working behind the scenes, making sure that everything is running smoothly. So if you do need help with anything at all, you can reach out to him in the chat. Secondly, I would like to remind you that this webinar is being recorded and that you will receive the recording in the next few days. Finally, there will be time for a Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. So if you have any questions for our panelists, please submit them in the Q&A tab. You can do so at any time throughout the webinar, and we'll do our best to answer them all. So after this quick introduction, we'll meet our experts, and then we'll get stuck into a roundtable style discussion before moving on to the live Q&A session. Now, that is more than enough from me. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our pros. I'm joined today by Lauren Tate, Emily Aldridge, and Mike Jackson. Panel, do you think you could tell us a little bit about yourselves? Let's start with Lauren and then Emily and then Mike.
Cool. Hi, everybody. I'm Lauren. I work at Assess First. We are a behavioural assessment specialist, ultimately focusing on bringing your candidates' natural talents to the forefront of your interview process. We're big advocates for understanding really the things like experience. They aren't very good predictors of actually how successful someone will be within your team. Whereas actually, if we understand things like their most natural personality traits, their motivations, their decision-making processes, we can then tell you how well they align to your culture. So my position at Assess First is predominantly focused around, well, it's kind of twofold. I'm the people partner for our international team. My background is in talent acquisition, but I also work very closely with our new clients in terms of onboarding them and, yeah, kind of bringing my knowledge of talent acquisition to their onboarding process and making sure it's as effective and as seamless as possible.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody. My name is Emily Aldrich. You can call me Em. I'm excited to be here. Welcome, audience members. I'm super excited to join this panel. I'm from the US originally, and I'm based here in Leipzig, Germany. By day, I am a commercial recruiter in global tech. And by night, I am a singer-songwriter, occasionally a heavy metal vocalist from time to time. So I'm always focused on audience, of course, and our audience being candidate experience for sure today, right? That being our focus. So yeah, I'm super excited to join this conversation. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of it. It's important to me. And yeah, I'm just thrilled to have a conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Hello, everybody. So also great to be here today. So I'm Mike Jackson, not the Michael Jackson, but Mike Jackson. So I'm the head of alliances and partnerships here at Piplet. So we're a leading platform for language proficiency testing. We help companies evaluate language skills by providing fast, accurate, scalable, tailored solutions for the global talent teams. And I'm also very excited to share more about my experience and how you can elevate the candidate experience. One of our focuses is all about the candidate. And more, when I meet clients and partners, one of the top priorities is how do we prevent drop-off? How do we give a great candidate experience? And I think employee experience was always a focus in the past. And I think now it's shifting to that first step before you even get into the company. So I think this is a great discussion for today. And thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Thank you all. I am very happy to be hosting you today. So now that we're all acquainted, let's get straight to it. I actually did want to start by giving just a little bit more context. So basically the starting point for today's discussion is the belief, or rather the misconception, that skills assessments damage candidate experience. Or that to be able to thoroughly assess a candidate's skills during the hiring process, you have to sacrifice the positive candidate experience that you aspire to. So what we want to get into today is how you can have both. So how you can effectively evaluate a candidate's skills and provide a standout candidate experience. So I wanted to start, sort of get the ball rolling by talking about what can make or break a candidate experience. So panelists, what would you say is the most common mistake companies make when it comes to assessments, particularly, that frustrates candidates, and how could they fix that? I'm not sure who to turn to first. Maybe Lauren?
Yeah, no worries at all. I think personally it is candidates just not really understanding why the assessment is being used in the interview. On kind of our side of the coin in recruitment, it can be really easy to be like, well, it's a part of our process, it's ingrained in us why we do it. But if the candidate doesn't come into this being like, right, I know exactly what I've got to complete, I know what information the recruiter is going to gain from me, and I know the value add both for the internal kind of recruiting team and myself as a candidate, I think it just sets this, sorry if you can hear my dog growling in the background, by the way, it just sets you off on this tone of like, oh God, I'm nervous, and I'm not really sure like what this benefit is for the process. And I think it's a really missed opportunity, because if you're using an assessment to get to know more about your candidate, even just letting them know that, which is obviously us for behavioral assessments, it's like your candidate comes into this process then being like, cool, they care about me as an individual, you know, they're prioritizing who I am all the time. And I think we should all have that solid understanding of, okay, yeah, what's in it for me as a candidate, basically, helping put them at ease, giving them all the information that they need to then go into that process being like, cool, level-headed, I'm not back in like a GCSE or A-level exam. In actual fact, this is going to help kind of optimize the process for me. So yeah, I think there's an education responsibility really for recruiters to pass on the knowledge of their assessment to their candidates to improve that experience from the get-go.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm quite sad that we can't see your dog, but
I'm sure she'll make an appearance. She will. Just give me a few minutes.
But yeah, absolutely. I absolutely agree. I think what you said about being what's maybe obvious to you is not necessarily obvious to candidates. So I think having that transparency and putting their mind at ease, obviously when you don't know you can easily spiral and you can easily imagine a gazillion things. If you know what's actually being assessed, then yeah, it can put your mind at ease. Mike, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, from my point of view, I think there's two things. Choosing the right type of assessment. And when you find that right type of assessment, so obviously we do language assessment here. And I think to define the type of assessment you want with the right framework, like the Common European Framework of Reference, the CEFR, which a lot of people know, and having what I think what you should do is benchmark properly. Because I think putting a test out there is fine. Maybe you find the most perfect test, maybe it's a really great experience for the candidate, but if you're not reviewing the results properly, or you didn't really do all that benchmarking, I think that also can affect candidate experience because you're not really understanding the results. And one of my things that I say to the clients is, do your own internal benchmarking. A lot of people come to me and say, what score should we accept? And I say, well, I have clients that have this and have this, but it's based on your job roles that you have. And the best place to look is inside. I think when you know why you're assessing and how to then understand the results, I think this can contribute very well to a candidate experience as well. It's a structured approach, it's fair, it's consistent, and I think all that contributes to a nicer experience, to be honest.
And I guess it's sort of, in a way, it's like you would approach a structured interview where you need to know what good, bad, and what that looks like.
Yes.
I guess that's the same idea.
Exactly. Yeah.
Emily, what do you think is a common mistake?
Yeah, I 100% agree with Lauren and Mike. And just as an aside, this idea of putting ourselves in the candidate's shoes. It's not necessarily the first thing that we do. Oh, there's the puppy. Lauren, if everybody would refer to Lauren's screen. Oh, how sweet. Oh my goodness.
Sorry, as you can tell,
great.
I don't have a choice on when she jumps up, so I'm sorry to interrupt, Emily, but
I'm glad that you did. No, I was just gonna say, put yourself in the candidate's shoes. We're always in a rush to figure out what skills to assess, and we've got to quickly get candidates in the door, but raise your hand if you've been in a job search, right? Like, picture your best friend applying for this job and what it's going to be like. And also understand what those most off-putting things are for candidates. If it's the length of time, if it's exactly like Lauren and Mike were talking about, the why hasn't been communicated, it's way too complex, or there's this perceived lack of trust, like automatically you've applied for the job and you feel like they don't trust you. And so you have to take a test. If you could somehow streamline that just by putting yourself in their shoes. Yeah, that's what I would add.
I agree. And I think having assessments that, if you can have them, are not too generic. They're really, if the job role's specific, I think candidates feel much better. And I think they perform better as well during the test because it's relevant to the role that they've applied for. We have different industry style questions at Piplit. So like a customer service style test, it's not going to tell you if they're good at customer services, but the challenges that they're going to go through and the responses that they need to make are typical real life workplace scenarios. So we feel having that, if you're applying for a customer service role and then doing a language assessment that has a theme of customer services, I think it's going to take out more. But then as a recruiter, I can review those answers as well and see how it goes. But from a candidate experience, I think it makes them feel more comfortable and you get better results. This is what I believe.
Absolutely. And I think it's it's probably applicable for any role. I think obviously CoderPad specializes in technical recruitment and relevancy and technical realism. Like it's very, very central to what we do. The feedback that we get from candidates that are frustrated with assessments, with online tests, is if they're getting questions that have nothing to do with what they would do on the job. It's like, why are they asking me about this algorithm, or how to build this, like how to develop this, when that's not what I'm going to do. Like, don't ask me to do that. Ask me to do something that I'm actually going to do on the job. And I guess with languages, it's the same kind of thing. If you're going into a customer success role, you were saying, or customer service role, and then you're getting questions on, I don't know, Spanish vocabulary that you would use at the fish market, like,
or something to do with hospitality, something unrelated. And that's where you get drop off, right? And that's something that we all try and avoid. And we worked very hard on this candidate experience and this journey. And 99% of candidates that take our test complete it. So that alone, because we focused on the candidate experience, the way that we present our solution, they're very happy. They're very happy and they complete the test. This is very important because if you have protected that experience, you'll get more results. So you can, you know, if you have drop off, I mean, it's not helpful for anybody.
Absolutely. So I guess that's one example. I wanted to ask you about examples of how skills assessments have improved the hiring process, either at a company that you've worked at or a company that you've worked with. I guess, Mike, that is one first example, is improving your drop-off rate. Maybe Lauren, Emily, did you have other examples? And then Mike, we can come back to you if you have more.
No problem.
So I think there's a load of different areas that that a company would look at in terms of improving their hiring process. And I think it really depends on the issue they came into the kind of dynamic and partnership looking to solve. A huge one for us is increasing diversity of their candidate pool, increasing the depth of their candidate pool as well. You know, not just hiring based on a CV, which immediately rules so many really high potential candidates out. Sorry, my dog is I'm just going to try and move her so she's not
she got
distracting everybody.
She's...
And then also in terms of performance as well, right? If you're hiring people that have a really strong natural alignment to your organizational culture, they thrive within that team. We see clients that come back and say, yeah, we've had like a 15% increase in performance with the candidates that we've hired through using Assess First to those that we did prior to using Assess First. So yeah, those would be my kind of key ones.
Nice. And I love hearing about this. You know, I love hearing from the source, right? Like the testing people as a recruiter. Yeah, we had a recent project that we were working on in Brazil where we were trying to hire people who were trilingual. So it was Spanish, Portuguese, English. Of course, I only speak English. I would love it if I was native in a second language, but I'm not. I think languages are a superpower. I happen to believe that, but I want to make sure I'm doing something that's fair and early in the process to help streamline when we have 200, 300, 400 applicants. So yeah, it quickened the process for us when we're trying to be in global markets. So I appreciate having language assessments, of course.
Sure, and obviously I concur with the language assessment. I think two other things to point out is why do assessments come in the first place? Because it can help us make quicker, better decisions. But I think from a language point of view, a while ago and before assessments were a bigger thing, it was the recruiters trying to do the language test. Or you would get somebody from the team to say, hey, come on this call and speak German for 3 minutes with this person. And it's not a fair assessment. It's not non-biased. That's not good for candidate experience as well. So I think having an assessment in place gives everybody a fair chance. And I think this is just really the best place to be. And it also keeps you in a safe place as a business as well. But I think from our assessment point of view, one of my biggest clients in the US, they're a software company that looks after restaurants, taking orders either by chat or over the phone, and they link the software to the produce in the restaurant, and it's really cool actually what they do. But what they've seen is because they added language assessment in, they was able to understand the proficiency of the candidate and put them into the right level of training into the job. Not necessarily did they use the language assessment to cut out. They just said, okay, this person needs a little bit more work, so this is what we would expect. That, you know, they might not put them into a level 2 role, which is more technical inquiries, for example, but it helped them place them correctly in the job. So they had a higher pass rate of when you go through your induction and your training, and this really helped them. So, I mean, that saves everybody a lot of money, right? Because your business hiring is not cheap. We know that, which is why assessments and having this process is helpful. But yeah, it helps candidates pass their probation or training period, and that's really good because they was able to position them right in the business. So great.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned training. I think that's another great advantage of it. It allows you to sort of identify where you know that you can help that candidate to upskill. And where actually you don't have those resources internally. So you can sort of identify strengths and weaknesses, and then you can sort of compare that to what support you know you will or will not be able to offer.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I mean, like, it's basically that's then going to impact the success of your hires.
Yeah.
And I think one thing we haven't mentioned that I would add is the relationship between hiring managers and recruiters. I think this is something that we see in technical hiring, is that hiring managers and tech recruiters, the relationship is so important and kind of fragile. It's sort of they really need to look after that relationship, and the fact that recruiters sort of, without an assessment or without a thorough way of evaluating candidates' skills, they were bringing candidates forward, bringing candidates to hiring managers that then weren't necessarily relevant, didn't have the skills that they needed for the job, or didn't have the right skills anyway, that they were sort of disappointing. It's a big word, but disappointing, hiring managers with the candidates that they were putting forward. And I guess assessments kind of give them the confidence to be able to put the right candidates forward, and then that in turn is going to improve that relationship. They're going to be able to build trust and, yeah, continue to sort of grow that relationship, that partnership. So I think that's also an advantage. What other questions do we have? So I also wanted to ask the panel how you would recommend that recruiters introduce assessments to candidates so that they understand their purpose and feel comfortable. So we talked about sort of transparency and understanding the why, but how exactly would you recommend that recruiters do that? What best practices can you share with the audience? Maybe Lauren?
So I think as a recruiter or a TA professional, you do your due diligence by setting out each stage of an interview process to your candidates. And it's not unusual for a candidate to come back and be like, how do I best prepare for this interview with my hiring manager? You know, what research or what questions should I be kind of prepared to answer? But I think the assessments can be a standalone part of that process when the same kind of attention isn't given to that stage. Whereas I think we can do a lot to kind of alleviate our candidates' anxiety around assessments by being like, it's a stage in the process and we're going to give you the same level of attention in terms of getting the best results for you from this stage as we would any other. And that comes back to what I was talking about earlier, you know, giving the context, telling them how long the assessment's going to take, being like, you know, don't worry, you can take it in 3 different parts. You don't have to take it, you know, you don't have to block out a certain amount of time to do all 3. Giving them insight into what to expect at each stage, what they're actually being assessed on, the relevance to the role. These can all be done in a way to really kind of alleviate a lot of that anxiety and stress, to mean that the candidates go into that feeling very prepared, which I think would just go such a long way. And also, you know, kind of doing a bit of selling by being like, you know, by doing this assessment, we're saving a lot of time actually by you spending the time to do 10-15 minutes worth of this assessment. It's actually going to save us like an hour and a half worth of trying to figure out the same information via a kind of 2-person interview. So yeah, just reminding the candidates of the benefits actually assessments will bring and the value add to them as well. For us, we have a summary report. So being like to the candidates, yes, you know, you're giving us time to take this assessment. Here's actually what we give you back as a kind of thank you, and here's some constructive feedback and objective data that will help you moving forwards, whether you're successful with the specific organization or not.
Mm-hmm. I think I'd just add to what you were saying about sort of communicating all those things and sort of setting candidates up for success. I think the only thing that I would say, which might seem obvious, but I think sometimes we forget, is to make sure that you give the same information to every candidate, just so that everybody's on the same, like, it's just a level playing field. Everybody's on the same page. Emily, did you have any advice?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with that, and just say, you know, for us, we've with past projects, we've basically said on the careers page, in those early moments within the application, these are the skills that we're looking for. You're going to be asked questions specifically within the assessment, less than 2 minutes, about this particular situation. You know, and also a lot of times we'll ask candidates for their feedback on the assessment. What did you think of that? Was there anything that was confusing? You know, just try to engage with them at each step. And then also, we kind of touched on this earlier, but the weightedness, the value of the assessment within the overall hiring process. How weighted is it, right? Like in terms of the hierarchy of skills for the role. If you have to be fluent in specific languages, and of course it's a no-brainer, but you know, we just want to have an idea of how much experience you have with said, maybe it's a CSM skill, like Mike mentioned, because if we know where the knowledge gap is, like he was mentioning, we can carry that into the development realm, which is, all of this is super streamlined. So just adding to that.
I think this is basic, right? It's about good communication. And I think what Emily and Lauren just mentioned is pre-advising or giving them awareness. And I think on the other side is to get feedback, to ask them how their experience was, whether they get the job or not. You know, I think it's great to get feedback, to see how they felt going through the process, general process, and feedback about the actual assessments that they've gone through as well. In that way, you can use that knowledge to better the experience as well. So communication before and even after, I think, is really important for me.
And we're actually going to talk a little bit more about feedback. I did just want to add to sort of my 2 cents again, but
always welcome.
I did want to add that I think also sort of having especially when it's online assessments, like Codopad and Piplet and Assess First do, is sort of a tutorial or something, like a way that they can sort of get to grips with the interface, something that they can sort of go into to see what it's going to look like right before they're sort of live and timed, and that there's more pressure. I think that's always a good idea. If you can offer that, that's always a good idea, just to sort of put candidates at ease. And I feel like I was going to say something else. Oh yes, I was also going to say another aspect to communicating the advantages and the sort of the why you're doing this, I think, is a great opportunity to sort of position your values, what is important to you as a company. And for example, with technical assessments in any case, a big part of it is we want to give everybody a chance. We want to hire you based on your skills and not based on your CV, not based on what school you went to or where you've worked before, not because you were a developer at Google. And so I think the idea is that I think candidates can buy into it if they also hear your reasoning and sort of if they buy into why you're doing it. And I think you sort of build trust in that way, sort of saying that we're doing this because this is important to us.
I think just to add to that as well. Oh, sorry, Mike. Do you want to go?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say one thing. I love what you just said, because nobody would hire me based on my CV, because my experience is not creating fancy looking CVs that have colors and nice photos and things like this. So if you looked at my CV, you wouldn't hire me. So I think to have that for assessment, for me, makes me feel comfortable, really.
I think also being really clear, like to what you were saying, Emily, being really clear to the candidate on the grading as well, and being like, okay, is this going to be like, we're going to stop moving forward with you or not? Or like I think you were saying, Emily, about like, actually, this is a development opportunity, you know, regardless of your scores, like we're still going to be able to have the chance to move you forward if we see the potential in you overall. But actually, it's going to give us a better awareness of where we would need to upskill you, or like how we can optimize your onboarding, for example, like giving the concept to the candidate of, oh, okay, this isn't, you know, if I really do badly in this test, that's it for me in this organization. But actually, it's just giving the company the best chance of knowing who I am as an individual to make the best choices moving forward. I think that's such a nice way of putting it.
Yeah,
absolutely. And so we did touch on feedback, and I said we would come back to it. So let's do that now. What is one thing that you think companies should always do when giving candidates feedback after an assessment? Why is it so important, and how do you advise that they go about that? I don't know if Mike, you wanna start.
Only to repeat my point. From a recruiter's point of view, how you give feedback, I'm not so experienced in that area, but I just to get feedback from them to you is a nice way to gain your experience. But I think Lauren and Emily will probably add more value to this question.
Emily, do you want to go?
Of course. Yeah, I was just going to mention, I like to keep it positive and constructive. Now, this is with a caveat, right? In specific markets, we can only give so much feedback in a certain way, right? Like depending on where we work and how GDPR works, of course, across Europe, or maybe what you've decided to do as a company, maybe it's given over the phone. Maybe it's something that's like a wrap up or a summary, right, from the assessment tooling experts. So you get to decide, how much of that feedback you want to share. Of course, it would be a disservice to do all of this negative criticism to a candidate. I feel as a recruiter that it's my role to cheer people on, not just in the hiring journey, but also in their career. Because we could see each other again, right? The world is a small town. So yeah, I like to keep it neutral, keep it constructive, but give it, and even in real time in an interview setting, or if you're doing like a live assessment, right? We see that in tech a lot, like just to say when a candidate is hitting the mark on something and training the hiring manager to do the same. So making sure you're on the same page.
I think there's always two sides to the coin, and it can be really easy for us when we're reading through reports and we see the scores and we see where a candidate's aligned with our expectations and where they haven't, to translate that over to the candidate and tell them where they did well and where they did poorly, for example. But ultimately, the other way of looking at that, and I use this all the time with candidates, is to be like, we aren't set up to elevate or optimize where you're at right now. So we all go into an interview being like, I want this job so much. I want to do everything that I can to get this job, without necessarily thinking about, is this job going to be right for me? Or am I going to find in 3 to 6 months' time, I tried so hard to get the job and convinced myself and everybody else that I was right. And then all of a sudden you're looking for a new job again because you're like, this just wasn't the right place. So I think we as recruiters, we do have that responsibility to say, you are amazing and here is what the areas that you're really great. But actually right now, we're not the right place to optimize your natural talents or your ability to perform in X, Y, and Z way. I've done this before where I've gone, actually, I do know of a couple of other companies that are just going to be better set up for you and your talents. And that gives the candidate that appreciation that they don't necessarily have to be fitting into our box. There is a box out there for everybody.
Yeah.
It's just we're not the right one for them right now. And I think leading on to your point, Emily, that gives them that ability to be like, I had a really great experience. I learned a lot with this recruiter. I learned a lot with this company. But they leave with their head held high rather than feeling that they've not fit what we need them to fit.
I love that. I think it's really kind to think of if you can provide other options. You don't always have the time. As a hiring manager in the past, it's really impossible sometimes to give such detailed feedback. But we have to remember the candidates are like customers, and how often do you find now? I did it in the past. How does this company interview? You find feedback forums and there's so much. Everybody's so willing now to give information about how an interview went for a certain position. I certainly look online. So I think that from an experience point of view, if you're able to tailor that feedback and end in a nice way, even if they don't have the position that they wanted, or you can't offer them anything, they may take to social. You just don't know. And I think that from an experience point of view, if I go on a website and just see negative comments, it's going to taint my experience before I even get there. So I love what you said there, Lauren and Emily. It resonates with me very well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's really it's actually changed. That's not something that I've heard framed that way before. So that's a really cool sort of contribution to this discussion.
Yes.
I think for our I mean, I'm outside of tech because obviously we are a company and we don't only have a tech team. But like, for example, you can have in marketing, in sales, you can have a very like product driven growth, or you can be very results driven. You can it's kind of the way that your organization works strategically at that time. And if you're looking for somebody who has that same sort of mindset and motivations, it's because that's somebody who's going to thrive and be happy and feel good in that role and do well. And if it's somebody who's not, then like you say, there are other organizations that will have a different approach, and it's not a question of right or wrong. So yeah, I love that. I think I would add, I think maybe the nuances, like we were saying, time. I think we would all love to give like the highest quality feedback possible. But sometimes, if it's if there are a lot of candidates going through an assessment phase, then it's just not feasible. And I know for technical assessments, for example, a tech assessment, like an asynchronous online tech assessment, is often one of the first steps of the process. And then it's something that sort of helps you to filter candidates, and then it's something you can build on in an interview stage. But for those candidates that sort of don't pass and don't have those sort of must-have technical skills for the role, I know it's not necessarily realistic to be able to give sort of personalized, not personalized, but personal feedback, but it is feasible to give personalized feedback, because with a tool like CodaPad, you're going to be able to sort of have an automatically generated report that's going
Yeah,
to say like these were their strengths and weaknesses, this is where they did well.
exactly.
And I think candidates always appreciate having that visibility and that transparency. So there are things that you can automate. I know we would all love to have a personal feedback for all of our candidates, but if that's not feasible, then I think sort of a minimum of what you can automate or
Yeah.
streamline, then that's better than nothing, definitely, I would say.
And I think just to add to that, like that's one of the coolest things about assessments is that it's this idea of technology, right, that helps us as recruiters give objective feedback that is based on results. It's not based on our gut feeling or our intuition or our subconscious bias. Like it's just telling the candidate, here's where there are areas of discrepancy between where you're awesome and what like we need right now. And oftentimes, like I would say to the candidate, you know, because of a time constraint, like if the candidate didn't get the score that we needed, I'd be like, there was a misalignment between your natural talents and what we are looking to hire for Assess First culture. And then if they came back to me being like, oh, hey, like, can you give me a bit more context on that? That would be when I would take the time. But for most candidates, it would be enough for them to know we're just two different people, but you know, we're not right. We're not going to be compatible like as a company and a person. But then for the few that did come back, then I'd be like, yeah, sure. Like I'll give you that feedback.
Thank you for that. Let's see. I also wanted to talk about some metrics or sort of signals that hiring teams should track to ensure that their assessments are fair and relevant and effective, and basically that they're doing it right, so to say. What sort of metrics would you recommend that teams follow? Emily, or maybe Lauren, did you have some ideas on metrics?
Should I take this one? Yeah. Cool. Okay, so first one for me, I think Mike, you mentioned this earlier, is getting the feedback from the candidates. Like have your NPS score that comes in after your interview stage. I know from personal experience that I would get so many NPS scores that would be about the interview process, but people would draw specifically on the assessment and they'd be like, oh, it was so cool. You know, I really learned lots about myself. It was a really like new way of approaching interviews, which was awesome because actually it stands out in the candidate's mind so much that when it comes to their NPS, that's the highlight of their interview process. So that was always really cool for me. I think, again, it comes to the issues that the current client or the specific client's looking to solve. And we'd always try and set these KPIs up at the kind of start of their implementation process. You know, are you looking to see an increase in female representation at final stage? Are you looking to reduce your time to hire? Are you looking to see those increased performance statistics? And then we'd set a time frame. You know, it's not going to happen overnight. And I think that's the really important thing with assessments. You need to have enough time for these candidates, A, to be hired, and B, to then show their performance is better due to the assessment. So usually we'd say, I mean, we have clients that see results within like 8 months in terms of increased diversity of candidates and increased diversity of the candidate pool. But yeah, we definitely look to measure those kind of 6 to 12 months in and beyond.
And Mike, something that you mentioned was your drop-off rate during the hiring process. I think that's also something that you want to be following. That you might go in, you might start using assessments thinking that you want to improve the drop-off rate. And yeah, I think Mike, you said that with Piplet you have sort of a 99% completion rate of your assessments. I think completion rate is a great thing to look at. I think at CodaPad we're at 99.6, so not too far behind.
Very good.
Just to give you an idea. But yeah, are people taking your assessments and following through to the end, going through to the end, or not? If they're not, then yeah, what do you need to change? And there are definitely tweaks that you can make. I don't think it's a case of like, oh, don't do assessments, do assessments. It's just a way of how are you doing those? how are you communicating them, how are like it's everything that we've sort of touched on so far. And that's definitely a conversation that you can have with your assessment provider. What did you say, Emily? The assessment people, the test people?
The test people.
Experts. The testing experts. I love that.
Nice.
Yeah. We like having that direct line of communication with you guys all the time. Yeah, and I would totally add to that. You know how this idea of the performance tracking can actually come back and inform your assessments once again. There's a lovely infinite loop that happens when you go, hey, new hire, 6 months in. Remember that assessment that you took? You're performing really well. What, what's your contribution to, maybe some skill gaps that we have on the team, insight basically. So I love that.
We had a really cool kind of feedback from a client the other day, and because with our assessments, you can assess your existing team and you can basically identify which personality facets and motivations exist within your top performers. And he was like, we have this constant raising of the bar because we use Assess First, we assess our internal people, we set a benchmark, we hire based on that benchmark, those people then really perform well. And I was like, that's such a cool way of looking at it, that as you say, it's this infinite quality improvement really, by always being aware of your team and what their strengths are. So yeah, I think it's a really cool, like consistent, sustainable method as well of using that data, not just to hire people, but all the way through their career, both to better them, but also to better your internal quality as well.
Absolutely. I think I'm going to ask our panelists one last question before we go to questions from the audience. I wanted to talk a little bit about technology. I think a lot of people want to know, and I think a lot of the conversations that we've been having with customers is how is technology like AI, like data analytics, how is that going to change how we conduct skills assessments in the next few years? Do you think you could share maybe your predictions, or how you think that things are going to change, how you think that assessment will be impacted? Mike, maybe you could start.
Yeah, with pleasure. I think with time and the more AI assists us, because I like to see AI as an assist to the process, not the be all and end all the time. But it gives you quicker insights. It helps you make better decisions. You have a wide spectrum of data. That's fair. I also think, sorry, I had a point here on diversity. I think it can help when you have a test that can adapt to the person, maybe from where they're from, or the background or the language they're having the assessment in. I think it can, because it can adjust to better fit the candidate based on their, it's a more inclusive experience. And I think that's something that it can do. I also love, not that AI can predict, but it can give you something extra. So for example, we can give you the CEFR score of a candidate to say they're B2. But what I love that what our AI does, it also says the potential of the candidate. So it says, hey, look, this is what they've mastered. They're at B1. Maybe they needed to be a C. I'm not too sure. It depends on the company. But based on the test, they've shown the potential and because that could have been one question that they answered really well. So I think it just gives you better insights, data points, and just helps you make better decisions. And again, I think AI can also help the test to be more inclusive. And I hope it helps more tests in the future to be more inclusive and fair.
Yeah, and I would add to that. I love what you mentioned about like just this topic of inclusivity. The disadvantaged groups, like what is that in context with assessments? Is it that they might have a visual impairment and we need the test to adjust? So if it has the ability to adjust so that it's dark mode, light mode, text can be enlarged, maybe time can be extended without penalty, or maybe if there's a socioeconomic aspect of it. Like I think about having specific hardware requirements depending how long the test is, or a high-speed internet. What about people who are in super far-reaching remote locations? Like, yeah, I think there's so many different parts of this, right? Like it'd be great if the test could just quickly adjust to that. And then the cultural aspects, we talked about this, and I think this is already happening. Correct me if I'm wrong, experts. But let's say there's a question in an assessment about like a silly nuance, right? Like a sports analogy in the US. and nobody else around the world understands like what that is, right? But maybe the test can adjust depending on the location of the candidate. So yeah, dream state, I have lots of ideas, and we'll see how much of that's already happening. But yeah, just the inclusivity.
That's such a cool idea. I have that all the time, being a British person in an American company.
Baseball references all
We
day
have
long.
so many
Yeah, home
references, or
run.
like I'll say something and the team's like, what? What does that mean? I was like, we're talking the same language, but you know,
Yeah,
it's so rich. That's what's so cool
yeah.
about it. Lauren, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think any kind of like tech-driven assessment, AI-driven assessment gives us a really like high scale chance for standardization. You know, most of our organizations, like, yes, you might have a video interviewing stage, but ultimately, even hiring managers that are trained subjective to the organization that they are within. Whereas actually, if leading to your point, Emily, like if companies all over the world are using an assessment provider, that assessment provider has to be able to cater for all of the different candidates that that assessment will go to, which therefore does bring things like inclusivity top of mind for these companies in order to kind of stay ahead, but also to compete with others in the area who might be providing more inclusive practices. So I think this is a really cool way of us bringing an equal playing field to our candidates, by being like, well, we all need to provide an equal experience, but we have such a large kind of pool of clients. Everyone's issues are kind of elevated really to mean we need to solve them. So I think that's a really cool way of looking at it. I also think over time, like there's no getting away from the fact that it's making our processes fairer from what we've just talked about. Like we know from the data that you know, women are actually more likely to interview for companies and feel more confident interviewing for companies that do use AI driven assessments, because they know they're more likely to be judged fairly than they would be by just the you know, a human led interview. And the more we talk about it, the more conversations we have about AI-powered and tech-powered assessments, the more educated we become, and therefore the less afraid we become of the value that they can bring to our processes as well. So yeah, I think we're slowly just coming around to the idea. We're becoming more familiar. We're seeing the benefits are outweighing the negatives, but also we become a bit more responsible as well. We actually do know realistically where there is the potential for AI to harm a process or to harm the candidate experience, but actually we're like, well, that's not the be all and end all, because we know what to do to prevent that from being the case as well.
I think it's, I mean, I'm just going to add very quickly before we go to the audience's questions. And I will say that CoderPad has in our resource center, there are some webinars and some blog articles on like AI and bias, or AI within the hiring process, if that is something that interests you and you want to know more about. And I think what I'd say is that I think it's not only going to change things for candidates and the candidate experience, it's also going to change things for recruiters. And I think the way that it can save them time, the way that they can sort of impact their workload. I think there are features like something simple, I say simple, but something technically very, very cool, but that seems simple, like transcripts during a technical interview, that's AI powered. And yes, it's great for the candidate, because if it's not their native language, or if they have any sort of neuro divergent profile, and that makes it easier for them, that's great. But I think also on the recruiter side, being able to have that sort of those notes, that note taker that's automatic, and that they don't need to be multitasking during the interview, that they can come back to afterwards, that's going to serve them for training. It's going to, like, there are just so many ways that it will impact and I think improve the hiring process and the assessment process, both for candidates and for recruiters. I'm going to go to questions from our audience. Thank you so much to everybody who sent in questions. We have a couple here. I've got one from, what do we have here? One from Celeste, who would like to know, what do you think of the Big Five personality test? So I think this is more of a question for Lauren.
Yeah.
Would it be useful for the candidates before even applying for a job? I mentioned this in order to prevent wasting time and avoiding disappointment for candidates. So what do you think the big five personalities?
First of all, I just want to say Celeste is, as far as I know, no way affiliated to Assess First, but this is a great question for us because this is our exact model of personality. And we also do offer a functionality that gives people the opportunity to complete their personality assessment before applying. So basically what this does is you complete one of our assessments. It tells you the cultural fit to the organization, and it tells you which of their job families you'd be best suited to based on your personality. So yes, we would absolutely say there's a huge place for knowing based on your most natural talents, your most natural personality traits, distinctive personality traits, which positions that allows you to have the most potential to succeed within. And what it also does is it gives those positions that maybe are like less well known within your organization. We have a lot of companies that are known for one type of role, right? But actually all the other positions, when like, you apply to Google, you think you're going in for tech positions. How about all of the other roles that are within that team? It gives people a chance to, if they're finding it that they need to start a new career, an opportunity to explore where their talents might be best suited to as well. And also it does save time. Yes, candidates spend a ton of time finding these jobs, but they spend possibly more time going through these interview processes. But if they know up front where they have the best alignment to, then you're really kind of making that process more efficient for them.
Okay, thank you. I also have a question from Julio. I hope I'm pronouncing that kind of right. Do you have any recommendations, on how to handle possible plagiarism, copying answers from the web during interviews? So I'm thinking during assessments. I think I'll just say straight away that this is obviously a massive concern for technical hiring. This is something that we've been talking to tech recruiters about recently, especially with sort of the presence of AI, ChatGPT, all those sort of tools that do make make it possible to look for answers outside of an assessment. And I think my recommendation, we have whole webinars on this where we talk about this topic for an hour because it's so interesting and there are so many ways of approaching it. But in a few words, I'd say that on the one hand, it's what I think you need a good definition of what you consider to be acceptable use of the internet, AI, any sort of external resources, and what you consider to be unacceptable. I think you need to be upfront about those expectations. So tell candidates if it's okay for them to use external resources like they would on the job, like for a technical role, for example. I would personally say, I think this Codapad's point of view is that it's absolutely fine to encourage candidates to use external resources. That is what they would do on the job, and you're trying to mimic sort of a real life situation. But yeah, if there are things that you don't want them to do, then be clear about what the limits are. And then there are all sorts of features that can help you to sort of flag any unusual or suspicious behavior that you then want to look into. So I think my recommendation would be to ask your, I forget what the name is, but your test people, ask them what features they have that can help you to sort of flag any suspicious behavior if that is something that you've been encountering. Hopefully that answers that question from a sort of technical assessment point of view in any case. Did anyone want to add to that one, or shall I go to another question?
I will just say it's one of the biggest challenges I think we have from an online assessment point of view. So in some positions, like you said, it's fair and it's okay to use external sources. In a language assessment, I would say that wouldn't be the case. So I think you need to because I think you want it to be a very robust test, but very secure. And unfortunately, that means you have to watch what the candidate is doing, either through behavior management or visual monitoring, or disabling features. I think the question was about pasting things, plagiarism on Julio's question. It's just a simple thing of disabling copying and paste, like we have in our test. That can stop a lot of things. And we have visual monitoring. Some people find this quite intrusive, but actually people kind of expect it, to have this little video stream of yourself and we're taking pictures of the candidate, which might seem like shocking, but actually it's the most dissuasive feature. So it's about having a nice experience for the candidate to feel comfortable, but also, especially in a language assessment, dissuading them from trying to cheat. And you need to just chat with your vendor about what do they have. Does it cover what your concerns are? I won't talk about everything we have. We have about 15 different things that help candidates not cheating on the test or flag suspicious behavior, and we provide contextualized reporting on that as well. But yeah, I think it depends on what type of assessment you're doing, what you believe, or what you want to prevent, and ask your provider. And there's generally everybody's got some sort of solution for this. Some are more deeper, some are not. But yeah, it's a big concern in the industry, and it's something that we're constantly tackling and improving in our solution anyway.
Yeah, it's definitely a legitimate concern, something that we're talking about more and more. I have a question from Jason. How do you folks, so we've talked a little bit about company culture and finding a fit. How do you folks assess or define a company's culture? One would think that is very difficult to truly do.
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't do that on our own. It's a process that we kind of work to consult your organization. One thing that we look at a lot is competency frameworks, your values. We look at how we can translate certain values or competency frameworks that you're using at the moment into, personality and motivations. Because of looking, personality and motivations in particular, they really, you're thinking about, okay, what does this company provide as a motivation? What kind of things do we require people to be energized by in order to fit into our team? What types of personality facets, again, would allow someone to be successful within this team in particular? So that would be what we look at a very kind of general overview without getting too bogged down into the position specifics, but really looking at, what does your culture stand for, and what types of facets would someone need to have as a distinctive trait to be successful within that team. But yeah, you're right, it's not an easy thing to do, but that's why our science team work with each organization on a very kind of one-to-one consultative level to really make sure that what we have in place as a model is really reflective of your team. And of course, we can actually look at your existing population. We give them the assessments. We look at their results that come back, and we can create a benchmark literally based on what your team has as their key motivations and personality traits.
Emily, did you have any sort of, as a insider
insider
perspective, have you sort of gone through that process of defining company culture, company values?
We're working with our sales teams and essentially trying to exactly that, just define internally what the culture was a step further, right? But I love what Lauren's talking about. That benchmarking is really helpful. We discovered one was like, we like to talk in we statements. So we needed to have candidates that maybe, even though sales is really competitive and there's a lot of me, moving the needle, we were looking for people who are really collaborative, and granted that's a characteristic, but there's also skill sets, sub-skill sets there. And so, we can be really transparent with candidates too and say, hey, this is what it's going to take to win, right? Like in the midst of your hiring process. But I love that. Yeah, we like to essentially pair the assessment with the interview process. So if the specific question was on like how to assess culture fit, maybe you would have the personality test aspect, right? Something quite general. Maybe you'd have an internal benchmark within the team, but then you'd also have your culture ad or culture topic. Let's discuss our values with somebody who's maybe a little bit less biased, somebody from another team. I've witnessed that myself, even as a job seeker, and it's really liberating. It's fantastic. You get a little different perspective as well.
Sure.
Because that's what they're like. We don't want to fit people into boxes. We want to make sure that it's, it's a good match. And obviously if there's an ad there, then we want to take that as well. So yeah, just adding to that.
Thank you. So I have another question on, we talked a little bit about feedback, communicating feedback to candidates. And I have a question on who we recommend delivers that feedback, hiring managers or recruiters? I think that's a really interesting question.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'll happy to give you my opinion on that as a recruiter. Just from my own experience, working within organizations, we streamline all of our communication from recruiting to the candidate. And that's because we're essentially trying to build this relationship, right? We are the first point of contact from time to time. Also, it's a safe space sometimes. Let's say you're moving through the process, you meet a hiring manager and it was a tough read. You have no idea how you did, but you'd like to get some feedback maybe from the recruiting team about what they thought. So yeah, we tend to make sure that we funnel all of the communication through recruitment in our organization. And I know some organizations do it differently, right? I've been there too as a job seeker, where in the midst of the interview, the hiring manager or the teammate will actually give you on the spot feedback as well. So as long as it's like decided your method of giving feedback, keep it consistent. That is what's worked for us. But Mike and Lauren, maybe you've got other experiences around this.
Personally, I agree. I think it can, unless your hiring managers are trained on how to give feedback, they shouldn't be giving the feedback. And again, you fall into the, are they subjective with their feedback? Is it too based on their own personal opinion, or is it against, a grading system? Have you got a scorecard that's being used? I also think in order for the feedback to be really constructive, a recruiter can kind of take away the experience in terms of how they performed and then be like, overall, we would maybe recommend doing X, Y, and Z to improve for next time or whatever. Whereas the hiring manager might be more focused on how that person has presented in that 30-minute slot. So yeah, I think for the candidate experience, for feeling like it's coming from a more neutral position and worded in the most diplomatic manner, I think recruiters generally would be able to do that in the best way.
Totally agree. Nothing else to add. I think you covered it perfectly. I
well, that is actually all we have time for today. It has been an hour already. It's gone very quickly.
You did say it will pass quickly.
It was quick.
Always does. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you for being here today. Thank you to Piplet and Assess First for hosting this webinar. And thank you so much to everybody who's joined us today. I will let you all go. I know we're over time, a minute over time, but I do hope to see you again soon at another webinar or anywhere else. So thank you all and have a really great day, afternoon, evening, wherever you are.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye.